Wait, did I set this up improperly or something? Hold on 1 second. Did I do something wrong on LinkedIn? Hold on. Give me one more minute. What an idiot. It's because I did it at 1 in the morning. How do I add LinkedIn? Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Sorry about the technical glitches, everyone. This is Andy Revkin in the Sustain What webcast. And we're talking today about a horrific event that unfolded in the Himalayas in the Indian state of Sikkim, where a glacial lake that has been building, part of a broad pattern around the world where retreating glaciers leave lakes and there can be sediment and ice creating a dam. These are on steep slopes, and when events are the wrong way, that dam can fail and create an enormous flood event. What you're looking at right now is video of what happened resulting downstream, where that flood encountered a dam, one of the new dams rising all around the Himalayas as India and Bhutan and other countries are trying to harness the hydropower from all that water that flows down from these great mountains. But that comes with a risk and cost. And I'm really pleased today to have some from across India, some top researchers and a journalist who are focusing on this kind of problem. We'll meet them in a second. I was really drawn into this because I've already covered this kind of event earlier. There was a disastrous destruction of 2 dams on a river in another part of the Himalayas in India 2 years ago. And Ramesh Bhushal, who's now the news editor of Third Pole, came on the show with others to talk about that. In Alaska, the Mendenhall Glacier has a big lake, and that created an enormous glacial lake and flood event that happily didn't destroy too much when it was triggered in August. But this is something we have to pay attention to. Hold on a second. So anyway, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And I hope you can pass around the link you're watching on to others right now, because these events, again, are not restricted to this part of the Himalayas. Let me just have my guests introduce themselves, because this has come together quickly and I'm not totally clear on your affiliations, except for Ramesh. Dr. Basantaraj Adhikari, can you describe a little bit about your expertise and where you are and what you're thinking as you've seen this unfold?
Thank you. Did you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello. Namaste from Nepal. Hi, this is Basanta Rajadhikari. So I'm working at the Institute of Engineering, Tribhuvan University, based in Kathmandu. So I'm just working similar kind of hazard scene in the Himalayas, mostly SKS region. So this is quite interesting event. When I saw this news in Twitter and other social media, and then I tried to figure it out what was actually happened. Actually, in the beginning, I was a little bit confused whether it was really intense rainfall or cloudburst, and then something landslide, dam outburst, flood, or something like that, because we had the similar situation 1 month before here in the central Himalaya.
Mm.
And then later I came to know that this kind of glacial lake outburst flood, and then dam breach. And then I found a very interesting paper by our colleague Asim about this modeling works, what could be happen if this kind of things happened before, for example, where you are displaying this published in geomorphology. So I mean, this is quite interesting because the changing environment and changing climate is really triggering this cascading hazards in the Himalayas. And we have written a paper in 2021 in Natural Hazard about the whole understanding of cascading hazards. So these are the events that are being unfolded in these recent decades or years, which is really interesting. And this is my interest as well. Thank you, Andy, for this now.
That's great, and that's a good segue to Ashim Sattar. So Ashim, you fall into this category of scientists who have effectively identified a hazard and vulnerability in your work, and yet the events unfold. This has happened on different scales and in different places I've been reporting on for decades. But let's just start with just the basics. What is you seem to combine both the geography and the climate and ice expertise. So tell us a little bit about you and how you came to be studying this lake and what's unfolding.
Yes, thanks, Sandy. I am Ashim Sattar. Currently, I'm working as a DST Inspired faculty member at the Devacher Center for Climate Change at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. I've been mostly interested in looking into high mountain hazards, mostly in the cryospheric domain, where glaciers are involved. And I've started working maybe from the last 10 years or so, starting from my PhD, where I started looking into Sikkim as my PhD project, and specifically this particular lake, which is the South Lonark Lake, which I was particularly interested to look at the hazard potential. I looked into various other lakes in the Himalayas, spanning across Western Himalayas, Central Himalayas, and Eastern Himalayas as well. What I am mostly interested is to look into the potential hazard that these lakes have, and what kind of damage potential, what kind of risk they pose to the downstream region through different techniques. Of course, one of the primary techniques or the tools that we use is remote sensing the satellite images that are available freely in an open source domain. We also have models that can actually help us model these extreme events like dam break or outburst from a particular lake, as in this case here in the South Lonark. If you look into the history of this lake actually has been in debate from quite a while now. I think it's more than several decades that it has been in the news, and people have been closely looking into the lake and monitoring the growth, and it has been exponentially growing over the years. And currently, I think the lake is almost more than 2 kilometers long. And the volume that was estimated, I think measured by scientists from Sikkim, was approximately 68 million cubic meters of water which the lake is holding. So I think I have some things to show in my presentation.
Yeah, I'll bring up
I
those
think I can
slides.
come back to that.
Oh,
I think that
yeah,
would be
we'll come back to that to go into a little more detail, and we'll meet the rest of our guests. Finu is at ICIMOD, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself and the agency that you're with. Thank you so much for coming on. And then Ramesh Bashal, the news editor of Third Pole, will come on. We had a little bit of a ragged start because my technology was funky. It was up too long last night. So Finu, tell us who you are and what ICIMOD is and why this event is so significant.
So hello everyone, my name is Finu Shrestha, working as a remote sensing and geoinformation analyst. So ICIMOD has been working in the research things on the cryospheres from a long time ago. So my basically focus is on cryosphere since the beginning of my career. I joined ICIMOD. ICIMOD has been working in the cryosphere field since 1998. So based on this field-based verification as well as this remote sensing technology, ICIMOD has conducted research in identifying dangerous glacial lakes of the edge-cage regions. So as time passes, the ICIMOD has been doing a lot of research on the individual glacial lakes, like how the glacier lake has been dangerous in terms of looking at the different triggering factors, and also this expansion of the glacier and the glacier lakes. So the research that was shown on the screen was the recent glacier lake publications that the ICIMOD as well as the teams and experts from the region has been done and has been published recently. So this research have identified a number of the GLOF that has been occurred in high mountain Asia. And besides that, it also include the informations like the type of glacier that has been breached out in the past, as well as what are the triggering mechanisms and the informations on the drainage and the volume, if the informations are available, and the and yeah, and other informations on the socio-economic informations like the number of fatalities that has been occurred from these disasters, as well as the number of the land and the agriculture's damage, or number of people displaced, as well as economic damages in terms of infrastructures and buildings and roads. So this has been one of the very collaborative research in high mountain Asia. So the research has been still going on in a particular lakes, basically in Nepal, that has been identified as very high risk.
Right.
So thank you.
And that's a great way to let's come to Ramesh, who, as a journalist, has been looking at this issue again pretty widely across the Himalayas. Third Pole is a fantastic journalism enterprise I've featured before, because it takes a regional approach to journalism. It's not state by state. It's not like, I grew up in Rhode Island and had the Providence Journal, the newspaper for that state, but you're looking at a region and regional risks. So Ramesh, when you woke up a day or two ago and saw this news unfolding, was it a surprise or something different?
I mean, it wasn't a surprise. At least it used to be in 2007 when I started reporting, or 2009 when I was thinking about climate change or reporting something like climate change. In last one decade, I have seen a lot of these events. In last one decade, I have seen like more than 7, 8, or 9 those kind of events, and I have covered a few of them. So I think it won't be a surprise next decade, and people people are okay with the news, but the problem is that we don't really discuss this kind of things throughout the whole year. So if something happens and we start talking about it and we stop thinking about it, because mountains are like, when I was spending a day the day before, everything was so gloomy, and when the sun comes in, then mountains look so beautiful and nice, and people think that, oh, these are nice beautiful mountains, and then they forget things that is happening. So basically, I think the whole thing is like how we perceive this problem. And one thing that you mentioned in the beginning was like, we are thinking about one event or one watershed. I think Himalayas should be thought as integrated system that works as a system. So I think that part of thing is lacking in this region, and that's why people don't really think in a holistic approach, and then the problems are taken, one by one or case by case, I think.
And that swings us back to the work of Hashim and definitely Icamod. I want to show folks the homepage for Icamod on the glacial outburst floods before we get back into the paper, because it really, I think you're trying to take this regional and even global perspective. Hold on one second while I do that. And I'm hoping people who are watching can share the video. This all gets archived so it can be shared later and when we're done. But hold on one second. Share screen. Here we go. So let's just briefly talk about that regional approach. Maybe each of you, starting with Finu, just getting back to you briefly on how important it is to heed that call that Ramesh just described. We don't think regionally often enough, and what are the what are the benefits to doing that, and how could that reduce risk throughout the area?
Yeah, so when talking about the risks, it's not about the settlements downstreams. There are a lot of infrastructures on the way that may cause the huge destructions. And also not about the issue of one country, it's the issue of two or more countries because of these transboundary issues. So there are a lot of experience in the past that a glove that breached out from one country has a lot of huge impacts in the downstreams that had a lot of destructions to the infrastructure, settlements, and a lot of other ecosystem also. So it's not about one country, it's for the two or more countries. So the study of this glacial lakes or the change that has been occurring on the glacial lakes is very important in terms of not only one nation but of the regional.
That's true. And so, Ramesh, I'm now going to switch to showing you something from one of Third Pole's really good stories on this, because it makes this point of the regional nature of the problem too. Hold on one second. Yeah, so this was a map and I'm very glad to see Nitesh Khadka from the Institute of Mountain Hazards and Environment, CAS in China, watching us right now. If you have questions, please do post them. So here's the region. Just mention what's the idea of the third pole. I think it's a great name. I haven't been to the South Pole. I have been to the North Pole as a climate journalist.
Yeah.
But this pole is something that's off most people's map.
Oh yeah, I think that's this is the third one. That's why it is off the map. But I think the third pole is, I mean, for people who are not familiar with this term, it is the third largest ice mass on planet. And then, as in the third pole, we thought that if you remove the country boundaries and see environmental problems, you see things differently. Because we are so divided, and this is just in between China and India. Half of the world is just nearby. And then if you start and you can figure out how tense the situation is geopolitically, and then there is a huge rush to grab the opportunities or the resources, because it is one of the least developed part of the world. So everybody is rushing to extract resources, getting through this, and trying to grab things for themselves. And then that's where the rush is. And people forget that this is the youngest mountain in the world. It is still emerging. It is still forming. And this kind of basic things are not in the perception or the thoughts that people use when they make a decision. I think that's the bigger problem. And also, this is the reason from where the 10 largest rivers in Asia originate. And then so it is big in scale. It is highest mountain range in the world. So we started to think about, if we remove the political boundaries and start reporting on river basins, for example, then how can we do it, or how do we perceive things? How differently could we perceive things if we remove our national biases, for example? Then how do we perceive these problems? So I think that's where this watershed basin, multicultural country, and a kind of a holistic newsroom that talks more in a holistic approach was designed in the Himalayas. I think that is the story behind this thing.
That's so great. And Earth Journalism Network was partially where this originated. And Earth Journalism Network is kind of a larger scale version of the same collaborative approach. And ICIMOD has the same approach, I think, on the science. So hold on. And Ashim, I'm going to get back to you in one more second. I just did find something that ICIMOD has posted that I think is worth showing, because if I had more time to organize, I would have done this originally. But hold on one second. So this is an explainer. I'm going to leave the sound off, and maybe again you can. Well, actually, Ashim, you know enough about this to be able to describe what we're seeing here and how this risk plays out. So here's the lake, and the glacier. Maybe just describe what this process is like as you watch it. Oh, Ashim, you're muted. I want to go back a little bit.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, so you can see basically what I was describing before. There's the it's a high place. There's a big head, as the hydraulic people talk about it. There's more water forming as glaciers are receding.
Yes,
And there
I
you
think
go.
That's how the glacial lake fails. Normally, you have the moraine, which is the obstruction of that of the meltwater that is coming from the glacier. And then if there
Right.
is any kind of mass movement into the lake that disturbs the water column, and there can be impulse waves which can be generated, and eventually an overtopping wave would initiate erosion at the moraine or the dam, and then there can be progressive erosion of the dam, and eventually the entire dam fails, creating floods downstream. These floods can actually reach up to hundreds of kilometers downstream.
Someone described this as like a tsunami too. The news reports were of 15 to 20 foot height of surge. Finu, is that the kind of data you were hearing?
You mean the source, tsunami?
Yeah, and well, this particular event was like a tsunami in a way, a big flow of powerful water.
Yeah, tsunami of water. I could say that impacts a huge area downstream.
One thing I wanted to ask you, have any of you assessed this question of whether there was a moderate earthquake in the area around the same time? This was Kashish Dasresha, who's a friend of mine, had noted that. And I don't know whether there's any indication, as Ashim was saying, we had, beyond the heavy rain, was there any geological factor possible?
Yeah, we had an earthquake in the west part of Nepal yesterday, and a frequent aftershock also. So I went to Asim paper, and he has clearly written that there was an earthquake in 1991 and 2011. So I didn't have acquired any recent this satellite image to clearly see what has actually the impact of earthquake over there. But looking at Google Earth, I didn't see, I couldn't see, or I couldn't identify that any kind of impacts that has been. I can realize that yes, there was an impact of earthquake previously. In terms of the moraine analysis or in the topographical characteristics, I could recognize there. So I think going into the field, I can only tell this if an earthquake has really impact over that lake or not.
So it's not the kind of thing you could
So
immediately.
maybe Asim can elaborate more about the impact of earthquake into that lake.
Yeah, Fino. Well, we do not have any information so far about any impact of that earthquake. But of course, earthquakes can be one of the potential triggers, which actually leads to internal degradation of the moraine. Because sometimes what happens is that these frontal moraines, basically the dams that hold the water, might have ice core within the moraine. So there is glacier deposits on the top, but there can be ice within the core of the moraine, that is the dam. So in case of earthquakes, when there is ground shaking, there can be internal degradation or failure of those moraines. But it's highly unlikely that, I'm not sure, but it needs to be investigated. Unlikely that the earthquake might have caused any kind of a failure of the moraine. But I think that is totally into a different subject. I think the seismologists should look into what has happened.
Okay. So let's get into the vulnerability. Can you pull up I've got your slides here now to show, because as I've been writing and reporting a lot, we think of disasters as natural quite often, but it's not. The hazard is natural.
Yes.
The disaster is a function of how many people and how much stuff is in the way and how vulnerable it is. So Can you talk about that end of this? We had the event,
Right.
this big flood, and tell us how that played out and how you were able to predict it back in 2021.
Yeah. Well, as you said, that hazard is if you define hazard, it is basically the potential. It is just a potential to cause damage. So a lake up there in the mountains, it's a hazard because it has the potential. But unless the hazard intersect with exposure or the exposure can be buildings, population, or any sort of elements, only then when risk comes into play. So it's basically exposure and hazard together, and also the vulnerability. So if there is more vulnerable, higher the vulnerability, higher is the risk. So these are all interconnected terms. And when it comes to glacial lakes are basically the hazard. Unless they have an outburst, they convert into a disaster only when there is damage to property or population or any other elements downstream. So what we have witnessed here is, of course, there was a hazard, which is the South Lonark Lake in North Sikkim in the Tista Basin. So what has come up lately in Twitter and I've been following is this particular image. We tried to look into some high resolution images before, but the area was completely covered with clouds. So the optical imageries did not give you a clear view of the region. But however, ISRO came up with this particular image, which is now available, which shows what happened. Here you can see the first image here is the glacial lake before the South Lonark Lake before the event, and this is what is a post-event imagery where you can see there is significant reduction in the size of the lake here.
Right.
Well, if you try to compare this extent, you can see this is a tributary glacier which is coming up here, and you can see there is some kind of mass which is being deposited here. It's kind of we are not exactly sure what actually triggered it. Is it an avalanche? But interestingly, we have this imageries coming in Twitter from Scott Watson.
Right. I'm going to show a big version of it right here.
Yeah.
So I just took this right off of Twitter because it's bigger than. Whoops! What just happened? Yeah, there you go. Scott. So do you know Scott or just through the literature?
I know Scott. Yeah, we have been working together.
Yeah. So here's a very detailed, fresh look at this.
That is my third slide.
Yeah. So no, I just wanted to make it bigger.
Yeah, that's perfectly the. So this is what we can see here is that we can see that some kind of mass is there within the lake, whether it is floating ice, it's sediments. If looking at the texture, it says floating ice or sediments. So it has to have been deposited from somewhere around the glacier. It might have been deposited from the surrounding slopes. So I think we are waiting for a better optical satellite imagery, which would help us to identify that region from where it originated. But interestingly, there is one more thing that we could notice here. If you see that there is this particular water body here, there's this lake here, which also I think showed some changes. So I think there has some dynamics happened somewhere around this area. This is not yet confirmed, but of course, I think better resolution and optical imageries in the coming days would help us to identify where exactly this trigger originated from.
Yeah.
So this is again what you showed, Scott Watson's figure. You can easily see the breach here. This is where the outlet of the lake was already existing. So if you see a pre-image of the lake, this particular outlet was existing, but you can see clearly that the breach, the widening of the breach here, after in the post image, and you can see in the post pre-water level here, the significant drop in the water level here. as well. And this was the flow path downstream towards Chungthang, which is approximately 68 kilometers downstream of the lake. Well, this has been circulating a lot in Twitter. I have taken it from Twitter. These are the credits. This is the Chungthang T-Star Hydropower 3. This is what it looked like earlier, and this is what it looks like now after the event. So we could see that this particular Gloff event actually triggered, it actually damaged this particular hydropower dam as well. Now, coming back to my research that I did. So this is Sikkim. So there has been a lot of inventories. So when it comes to glacial lake studies, it basically starts with the inventory. How many lakes are there? So that's the inventory, and that needs to be monitored at a regular basis so that we are aware of the fact that how many new lakes are forming and what is the condition of the existing lakes. The monitoring of these lakes are very important. And coming to the South Lonark Lake or the glacial lakes in Sikkim, we have so many. There are several studies in the past. They have reported glacial lake inventories. These are some of which I have listed here. Well, here what we try to look at is the larger lakes in Sikkim, which are above 0.3 square kilometers. And you can see here, this is the northern part of Sikkim. The larger lakes are located here in the top part of towards the northern part, towards the border of Sikkim here. This is where lake number 2 is the South Lonark Lake here, if you can see. So that's where the Gloff originated yesterday. If you look into the lakes here, so if you see, the lakes have been marked as 1, 2, 3, and Lake 2 is the South Lonark Lake. And if you see the temporal growth of the lake from 1990s, so you can see lake number 2 in 1990s to 2018, there has been significant growth in lake number 2 here. Red color denotes the lake area in meter square in 1990s, and the blue one is what was the area in 2018. Among all these bigger lakes, we can see that this lake has exponentially, it was one of the fastest growing lakes in the state. Well, also looking into some of these previous studies, there has been a lot of other previous studies which actually determined this particular lake to be potentially dangerous, starting from papers in 2013 from Raj et al. And Warni et al., where they have actually, Agarwal also said that there is high Gloff susceptibility. So that was quite, it's I think a decade back, the studies have been already they identified. So if you look into the region, I quickly show you the region here. So so this is where the lake is. This is from a different study. This avalanche source is not what I'm talking about, what happened yesterday, but this is what, just to show about my study, where we try to do some predictive modeling. This is where the South Lonark Lake is, and this is how the flood wave, glacial lake outburst flood came all the way down. This is where the Chungthang village is, where the T-Star Hydropower 3 is located, and it's almost 68 kilometers downstream. But of course, this event had impacts going up to 200 kilometers downstream because there was damage of this hydropower at Chungthang. So looking into the satellite imageries, multispectral imageries, that we see that 1990s to 2019, you can see that there was already a outlet to this lake even before this particular outburst happened. And if you see the growth of the lake from 1990, it is 0.4 square kilometers to almost in 2019, it's 1.5 square kilometers, which is, it's been growing continuously. Looking into the hazard, of course, there can be multiple triggers, as we know that it has to be triggered by either some kind of a mass movement. So if you look into the surrounding region of the lake, this is a Google Earth imagery. This is the particular lake, and we can see that the lake is surrounded by very steep slopes. And these slopes are consists of glacier ice as well as the bedrock. So any kind of mass movements starting from these steep slopes can impact the lake and can initiate an impulse wave, which is like a tsunami, and then that eventually overtops the frontal moraine, and then it causes flood. So these are some of the important exposure. Downstream, you can see this is the hydropower, T-star hydropower 3, basically here, the hydropower we can see here. So what kind of, how do we do the predictive modeling, or how do we do, how do we actually try to determine the hazard and the exposure? Is basically through modeling approaches. There are different ways we can look into that. Either it can be a dam breach model, it can be a process chain model, or whether we are looking into a current scenario or looking into a future scenario. So in South Lonart Lake, when I was trying to do my research, we tried to look into two different aspects. The first is looking into the current hazard of the lake. What is the hazard of the lake, and what is the potential downstream exposure, and what is the future exposure? So if you see, as already I think Andy, you have explained how our glacial lakes expand. You can see this here. If you can quickly zoom in a bit here. So this is how a current lake looks like. As the glacier retreats, the glacier thins and it retreats. What happens is that the new bedrock is exposed and the water volume increases. So eventually what happens, if you see this, the difference in between present and the future, the current lake actually is a little far away from these steep slopes here, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens as the glacier increases its size in the future, these lakes approach these steep slopes, and they are exposed to mass movements like avalanche or landslides. So which actually increases the susceptibility of the lake in terms of potential failure, right? The second thing is about the hydrostatic pressure that has been forming on the dam. So as the water increases, there has been more pressure, which is building up on the moraine. So, of course, these are long-term processes. That hydrostatic pressure onto the moraine can eventually lead to failure. But these are slow processes. But when we're talking into fast, rapid movements, these are basically avalanche hitting into the lake, and it's like a catastrophic event that happens within seconds or minutes, or maybe a few minutes or so. So this is how it is done. Basically, this was the water depth of the lake. This was based on the sonar survey. This was from Sharma et al., researcher from Sikkim, who actually gave the depth of the lake. It was based on a boat survey that was sonar-based survey, and we could see that the deepest part of the lake is approximately 131 meters.
Wow.
Yes, 131 meters here, you can see. And so the approximate volume that was reported by Sharma et al. Was approximately 65 million cubic meters. So that's a huge amount of water that this particular lake is holding. So when it comes to dam breach analysis, we try to look into various scenarios. Since these are predictive modeling, we do not know what is going to happen in the future. What kind of scenario can happen? I think it can be a breach event. It can be a piping event, piping event in the sense that the breach starts from any part of the moraine, and it can be an overtopping, a tsunami kind of an event. So we never know what kind of an event is going to happen in the future. So basically, when it comes to predictive modeling, we try to look into several scenarios, so that we are into conservatively, we are looking into the best possible scenarios that can, or the worst case scenarios that can potentially impact the valley. So this is how it is done. So you can see this is the South Lanark Lake. We try to do some dam breach analysis where this particular dam breaks and the water flows down. And what would happen if the breach of the dam is more wider? If you see the schematic, this is more wider than what we have seen in scenario 1. This is a quite narrow breach. Whereas here we can see that the top part of the moraine remains intact, whereas the breach happens below the moraine, below the crest of the moraine. So we try to look into all these kinds of different scenarios, and these are the dam breach events that way. And then finally, what happens is we try to look into the flood that actually reaches downstream. So in case of South Lanark, we saw that an overtopping event would lead to a peak of 6,000 cubic meters per second of discharge, at the location of the dam. And if you come down to the place where the Teesta Hydropower 3 is located, you can see that it is approximately 3,828 cubic meters of water that reaches this particular hydropower dam. If you look into the flow depth and flow velocity based on the modeling results, this is the Chungthang settlement here. You can see that the flow depth are approximately 8 to 12 meters here, and the velocity of the water is approximately 4.5 to 9 meters per second at this location. So this is basically just one scenario. There are several scenarios that are modeled in our papers. That is and then I'll quickly wind up. I don't want to take much of the time. I have a few more couple of slides. Then we try to look into what kind of an event might happen in the future, and what can be the maximum extent of this particular lake, that is the South Lanark Lake. If you see, this is a pretty interesting slide, which I always love to show. This is the evolution of the lake. In 1990s, the South Lanark Lake was a tiny little lake. In 2020, it grew a little more. 2010, it started growing more. And this is how the future extent would look like. That would be the maximum extent of the lake. So you can see this is where the glacier 2019 glacier terminus was, and I think it has retreated further more now. In 2023, we have the glacier terminus somewhere here. We have still glacier ice sitting on the bedrock, which I think with time, as the glacier melts and retreats, this particular region would be converted into water and it would grow. So we'll try to look into what would happen in the future if such bigger lake, what is current lake, the South Lanark Lake is, maybe a 30% bigger lake than what it is now, would cause impact on this particular village called Chungthang. So we saw that this Chungthang, the settlements along the shore of the river is at moderate to high risk. The high intensity zones. They fall. This is not the risk maps, but they are intensity maps. They fall in high flood intensity zones, and some of these are exposed. The buildings that we have marked in red here are basically the exposed buildings, potentially exposed buildings, based on the scenarios that we have modeled. And these are some of the research papers. If you would like to read more on this, I think there are more details here. I'd like to stop here, I think, if you have any questions.
Well, yeah, I'd love for reactions and questions from the others here who are also deeply dug in on this. Maybe, if anything, Fino, is there some idea, response you have to this look?
Yes, Andy. So what Asim has presented, I truly support him, because when I did the research also, that could be the many triggering factors. And the recent publication, what we have just recently published, also stated that the mass movement, so 54% of the mass movement has caused gulf in the previous years. So I think for this South Lonak also, intense rainfall could not be one of the purpose that lead to the failure of the moraine. So when I did an analysis based on the available images, what I noticed was that there are the North Lonak just right on top of South Lonaks, from where there is a continuous water outflow that is feeding South Lonak. And besides that, there are glaciers also, and all the glaciers outflow has been feeding South Lonak. So because of continuous outflow of that water into the South Lonak, there is already the hydrostatic pressure built up on South Lonaks that can cause the moraine that retain the lake becomes unstable. So, and there are the mass movements caused because I can see a lot of hanging glaciers that surrounds that lake. So, and also the glacier, this crevasses I can clearly notice. So because of that, and also the earthquake, no, you just previously mentioned, a small earthquake could have also triggered that a mass of glaciers that has been hanging just beside the glacial lakes to fall into that lakes. And also rainfall that has been occurring from the past few days could be one of the triggering factor, plus all the triggering factors that I just mentioned could be the reasons of the failure of the moraine. So just by analyzing the optical image or other high resolution image, we can just predict the major causes. But if we visit to the sites and do the detailed field investigations, then we can obviously identify the reason behind this dam failure.
And then getting back to the key point that Ashim mentioned about exposure and vulnerability, maybe Dr. Raj Adhikari, or certainly Ramesh, I know how much growth and development and construction has been happening in the valleys below these lakes, not just Lonak, South Lonak, but how much of the concern is related to, we've heard a lot about the hazard. Let's talk about that vulnerability now.
Shall I take?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I
Please,
mean,
please.
I'm not quite familiar with this particular valley, but when I see these kind of valleys in the Himalayas, throughout the Himalayas, the construction are going on. For example, if you read some of the papers published by some of our colleagues, for example, Ulgang Swagenhut and others, they published in 2016, where they were showing the glacial lakes and the hydropower that we are constructing and we are already planned to construct. So the increasing population and the infrastructure development is already concentrated in the river valleys where we have a high uh, glacial or glop risks in the Himalayas. The most important thing is that people uh, either they don't know or they have the risk acceptance, so that they are just concentrating their development practices in those valleys where there is a glop risk. For example, if we take some of the valleys in the central Himalaya, some of the people, they know that the risk exists there. For example, if you look in the central Himalayas, maybe Fino knows that there's a lake called Birendra Tal in Gorkha district, and then just right beneath of this lake there is a village called Sama. If the lake just bursts, and that would be a really difficult situation for them. So that's why the vulnerability is really increasing in terms of different changing climate, but the concentration of people to the river side location or the river corridor is also another challenge. I stop here, and Ramesh, please go ahead.
Yeah, Ramesh, I know this is where the journalists get focused because, people, if a glacial lake outburst happens in a remote part of the world, nothing happens. It's just a geological phenomenon. So are people awake to this risk? Are people reading your stories?
I think, Andrew, the whole thing is like, um, everybody wants to cross the Himalayas because it was such a barrier for so many people, either Sikkim or Bhutan, or say even in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Nepal. So everybody is trying to say this was a barrier and we need to cross it so fast. And everybody is moving to cross it. And then they are building these roads everywhere they can. And the problem is, there used to be this kind of incidents in the past as well, I think, but the problem is we exacerbated this by constructing this bad kind of a infrastructures, for example. And
Yeah.
these infrastructures were thought to make life easier, but neither they are operatable around the year, nor they are helping people. So what is happening is, when the roads were built along the riverside, all the people in the hillside, they came down thinking like, there will be new businesses, there will be more tourism, and then the concentration is along those banks where a bit of economy is growing. But the whole problem is, it is not like thought seriously. Neither the governments talk about it. So everybody is thinking that we need to cross the Himalayas, we'll make this a transportation and movement kind of things, we will increase our economy. But nobody is thinking about what we did wrong and what that could bring in. I think that's the major problem of the reason that deeply rooted, what you called, pro-development narrative that is built
Mm.
um, along. I mean, in all the governments, and that is what you called, that is transferred at different levels. So if you talk about environment, they just think, oh, you are here to block our development right or development work, which is not actually. It is supposed to be making it better, but nobody thinks that way. So I think, and one important thing that I want to mention here is, in the in the past few years, the politicians have started to use climate change as a weapon
Hmm.
to hide their corruption, to hide their malpractices, because it is also the result of the malpractices that is being done, all the corruptions that go into the infrastructures. So I think this shouldn't be used as a weapon. We should clearly say that it is a combination of climate, malpractices and corruption, and the ignorance that the governments and others are doing in the region.
Yeah, and that, by the way, that pattern is not unique to the Himalayas. In Alaska, the glacial outburst flood that happened there, it terribly eroded, undercut houses that were just built recently on the riverbank. The same phenomenon. The population density is lower. It's Alaska, but the same phenomenon. And this issue you raise about climate change being blamed without regard for these development patterns on the ground is common as well. I've written about this in the wildfire zones of Colorado. Some people are very quick to say, yeah, it's climate change. The Pakistan flood, actually, different context. The leaders of Pakistan were blaming climate change and not talking about the faulty dam construction and population growth in those areas. So this is a real big challenge. I think your work, Ashim, particularly the work that you do, to all of you, ICAMOD, to bring the exposure and vulnerability into the picture is vital. And it's great to see all of the work that's underway. There's a question that came in from Nitesh, who's at that Chinese institute. He says, my question to the experts, there are hundreds of dangerous glacial lakes identified among thousands in the Himalayas. Is it possible to mitigate all the dangerous lakes? What measures would geoscientists recommend? Which lakes must be focused, larger or smaller, for risk mitigation? This is an interesting question. Is there some common practice that can kind of mitigate this risk? You can't completely unbuild all of these towns. And there can be much discussion about future dams, but what do we do right now? And I wanted to ask you, before you all answer, and maybe we'll start with ICAMOD, there were some efforts to remediate this particular lake risk. I'm going to show one. Whoops, that's the wrong thing. Hold on one second. I'm going to show you some news coverage from a few years ago. So here it says, whoops, let's get him out of the way. Mission accomplished. There was pipes and siphons were put in up in, this is 2016, to siphon lake water installed. This seemed it got a lot of attention at the time. It's a dramatic and interesting project, and there are a couple others like it. Was that sort of too little, too late, or what are the possibilities? And again, let's start with Finu at Ikamad.
Yeah, Nitesh, thanks for the questions. So for monitoring of glacial lakes, it is possible for all of the lakes through remote sensing technology, and ICIMOD has been doing this since the past decades. So for mitigations, I would say it requires a lot of fund and sponsor from the donors, which is not possible because for that a lot of like study and a budget for the structural construction needed. So what we can do is a non-structural, adopted non-structural techniques, that is install early warning system to a very high risk, so that we can alert a timely notifications in case of flood in the vulnerability communities. So the another question was on, sorry, what was the another question?
Well, just actual reduction of the risk at the lake, to drain them essentially. Is there a way to reduce the pressure? It seems like a hard problem.
Yeah, that's very difficult because for Nepal has reduced this done the mitigation measures for only two of the lakes till now, for the Choropa glacial lakes and Inja glacial lakes, because it requires a lot of funds to carry it out, and also the collaboration with the stakeholders and the donors and all the experts, which requires a lot of time. And the Nepal government has also released a report that claimed that by 2025 Nepal government will lower the three of the lakes by 2025, and by 2030 the government will reduce additional 5 lakes. So if we see the report or the activities till now, only 2 of the glacier lake that has been considered as high risk has been able to lower down. And yeah, and which one to monitor, like small glacial lakes or a large glacial lakes? If you see the past experience, even a small lake has breached out, and that has damaged a lot of infrastructure, settlements, road trails in the downstream vulnerability communities. So we can't say that which lake is going to outburst in the future. So we only can do that, monitor and just identify which lake is very low risk, medium risk, and high risk, and very high risk. And of course, if the small lake can damage a lot of destruction in the downstream, then what about the these very large lakes like the South Lonax that can put double or the triple impacts in the downstream? So what I can say that we can monitor this all of these lakes, but couldn't mitigate every lake, but only focus to those lakes which are very high risk or probable could be in the scenario that needs a very quick mitigations measure.
So I want to
thank you.
pause for a second because another journalist has come into the mix, Keith Schneider. I noticed on Twitter that Keith had been in the region where those 2021 dam failures had occurred, and he's a water journalist for many decades. So I just want to say a quick hello and thank you for coming in. Keith, if you could just introduce yourself briefly in your current...
Andy, it's great to see you. Thank you for the invitation. Such an interesting conversation. So my name is Keith Schneider. I'm for years and years and years an environmental journalist, and for 12 years did work internationally before the pandemic. It sort of crippled that part of my career. And in 2013, I reported on the Uttarakhand flood. I was there in November and December, which was 5 months after the flood occurred. I heard about the flood during the project that we were doing on confrontation between water, food, energy, and agriculture in India. I've been to India 9 times, so that was maybe my 6th or 7th time, and discovered, just a torrent of water had come down through Kedarnath and other cities along the Mandakini River and just tore out dams. I mean, dams were lost, dams were overtopped, dams were buried in rubble. estimated 30,000 people were killed, according to one institute up in the Himalayas. And it led me to a new conclusion about what was happening on the Earth, which I've been drawing closer to. But basically, my conclusion after seeing all that was that what I call Earth is pushing back. Earth is pushing back hard now, and there are many, many more people in the way. There are 100 million more people in the Himalayas than there were a generation and a half ago. Right. And the region is experiencing, the climactic results of global pain, global climate pain, right?
Global climate pain. I like that. I mean, I don't like that, but I appreciate that framing. Hold on, because there's a couple of good questions that came in from someone named Austin Lord, who is talking about the importance of social science here. A few social scientists have also analyzed risks and vulnerability of hydropower in Sikkim. For example, this paper from Amelie Huber. I may have to do a subsequent webcast on this to get Amelie in. And he says, on the topic of ignorance, I also have written about strategic ignorance along Nepal's hydropower frontier. For example, this paper based on my own research on avalanche risk in hydropower in Langtang. Now, I can pull these links up later and distribute them to you all. That idea of strategic ignorance, I've seen, again, in so many instances where you have competing priorities. In this case, electricity, particularly clean, hydropower. If that's your priority, you can strategically wall off some of these issues, not just in your head, but in your policies. And I wanted to throw that back at Ashim, because that was a core warning in your paper in 2021 was, these are real geophysical realities. Here's the vulnerability. So is this a hard part of the problem, that when there are competing priorities at the national or regional level, they just kind of cause that sort of quote unquote ignorance?
Yeah, Andy, thanks for the question. When it comes to vulnerability, I think this can be, of course, divided into several segments. It's either physical vulnerability or social vulnerability. What sort of vulnerability are we talking about? If it is social vulnerability, we are targeting the people. If it's physical vulnerability, we are looking into the structures or the buildings or infrastructure. So when it comes to natural hazards, it's the first thing is that the uncertainty of these events. We never know when these kinds of events might occur. So there's this the probability of occurrence of such an event is unknown. So that actually restricts the capability of quantifying the vulnerability in one sense. The second important thing is I would not be able to comment on what policies are there, since I'm not aware of the policies and the construction that has been going on in these areas. But when it comes to vulnerability reduction, there is, as Finu already mentioned, it can be either structural or non-structural measures. Structural way can be either you try to reduce the hazard potential at the source, which I think you showed one of the slides where the South Lonark Lake was lowered by a few meters back in 2016. And non-structural ways can be spreading awareness to the people or communicating to the people, telling about the hazards that exist. The second thing, the most important thing is about these glacial lakes is that when these hydropowers were constructed, there wasn't any. The lakes would have been very small, and with time these glacial lakes have expanded. So what happens is that the hazard, which was initially seen, was less, but with time, as there is global warming.
Didn't mean to have the sound. Yeah, the hazard, right. This Keith knows about this too. There used to be this. There was a paper, a hydrology paper in 2005 or so called "The Death of Stationarity." Meaning, stationarity is where you develop your regulations and your rules and your construction norms based on a known hydrological or environmental realities. And when the system is changing, if you're not reassessing, then you're in trouble. Keith, I don't know if you want to weigh in. I imagine you've come across that concept.
In India, particularly, the there's more water coming down those mountains, right?
Mm-hmm.
You guys are describing that. B, it's coming down in more torrential, fierce, momentous events. And 3, there's more people there. So in the 2013 Uttarakhand flood, the people died because the flood occurred at the height of the Hindu movement of religious pilgrims into the temples high in the Himalayas in the spring, and they were there. And there was all of this construction to handle that tide of pilgrims every year, and especially in the spring, in June. So Kedarnath, which is where it was hit the worst. I mean, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people in that village that got swept away, and downstream as well. Plus the village, the cities that lined those rivers that got flooded at that time. The thing about another thing about that flood that surprised me was it didn't attract any attention. I mean, it didn't attract much attention in India. It attracted no global attention. I heard about it because I was preparing to go to India to do this project and was told by a scientist, "Have you heard about this flood?" I said, "What flood?" And she said, they've had this massive flood in June and it killed a lot of people, and it took 1,000 kilometers of road just disappeared in that region because of this flood. And there's so much kinetic energy in the Himalayas. It's so steep. It has so much water.
This lake was 17,000 foot elevation, I believe. Is that right?
I mean, the glacial lake burst, right? And it just came down that mountain at the speed I said of a pack of hungry dogs. I mean, it just swallowed everything in its path. And
I do want to push back on. I mean, you're right. India is now the most populous nation on the planet, and as Ramesh said, the Himalayas more generally have the same pattern. You have half, China and India, and Bangladesh, and the rest in the downstream areas. But this same pattern is exacting big tolls in America. Back in 2015, 2014, I wrote about these flash floods in Texas, that in an area that since the 1920s had been called Flash Flood Alley. And what had happened is Texas built enormous vulnerability, all these big developments right in floodplains, and they get washed away. And there too, the sort of liberals start talking about global warming and miss that. And the same thing, in Alaska with the Mendenhall glacial outburst. You can see development, again, not as dense, not as many people, but the same phenomenon. And so I don't think this is a regional or sort of an Asian phenomenon alone. And wildfire zones, the same thing. I've written about too many instances where these geographers, Steve Strader and Walker Ashley, they've done this everywhere. They call it an expanding bullseye. We're kind of building expanding bullseyes. And then when the $1 billion disasters pile up, everyone goes, "Oh, it's climate change," and they're missing that factor. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, are you still in New York?
I live in Maine now.
Oh, you live in Maine. Well, we're, our city, I was raised outside New York. You drowned, 4 days ago? Again?
Yeah.
How many times has New York drowned since 2015? 3?
Yeah, but it drowned in 1882, had the highest rainfall rate ever measured in New York.
And one more thing is, Andrew, who is the main victim is, like, I was talking to some private hydropowers, and one guy was talking funny to me when I was doing a last story. He said, like, "Oh yeah, we had a return period of 100 years calculated, and then the flood came in 5 years." And he thought that 100 years return flood means the flood will come in 100 years, but it could be next year, it could be next month, it could be in 4 years, it could be
Right.
3 in 10 years. And then and I think these private hydropowers are more chilled out because they think that if their infrastructure is devastated, they will get insurance. But the problem is the communities who die, the communities have to pay a lot. Those people who died, they don't have insurances.
You don't have
The
insurance.
people who, and then those people were the ones who were taken out from their places. So I mean, ultimately, the communities are in trouble, and then that's where we don't think these problems from their angle. I think that's also one thing that we should also think about when we talk about this kind of things, and who gets this, actually, who is the victim. Um,
Yep.
so I think that's one of the things I figure out in the recent years, and I think there's one thing that is happening is like everybody says, oh, there's so much of potential in the Himalayas. Yes, there's potential, but you don't need to exploit every potential. You
Yeah.
need to take something you need. I mean, you don't have to just take everything from it, right? And that's number like potential of 100,000 megawatts from Nepal, 200,000 megawatts in India or Pakistan. So they can't calculate these numbers, so big numbers, and then they calculate the potential numbers and then explain this. Look how much how rich we are, for example, right? And
Right.
then
Right.
that's where the problem comes in.
Andy, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So it's been 10 years since I was in Uchakan, and I did a number of stories as a result of that flood. And one of the conclusions that I reached, along with some of the people that I was working with, is that flood and others was going to bring to a halt Vajpayee's campaign of 10 years before to make to turn the Himalayas into 150 megawatts of power. And I'm wondering whether that there are any new dam proposals that are underway that are actually under construction. In fact, I found one dam there, 2,000 megawatt dam, that had been brought to a halt because of civic opposition to it at that time. So, is there any new? I know there are proposals. Any of them under construction? Any of them advanced at all?
Love to hear from the folks on the screen.
I think so many hydropowers are under construction.
Yeah.
Across the Himalayas. You can see like at least like 5, 7, or 10 big hydropowers under construction in Nepal, like 500 megawatts, 700 megawatts, 900 megawatts kind of thing.
These are in
same
India. They're Indian. They're Indian dams.
But there are so many. I think. I mean, we have reported so many articles about it. Either it's in Uttarakhand or in Himachal or in Sikkim. Quite a lot. Quite a lot.
Well, maybe there's a partnership journalism project
Yeah.
that can be done on this, getting at the finance and the like. Here's I'm just going to show you a story from the third poll, which I think is doing incredible work on this. Hold on a second. Thanks all for your patience and for coming on today. Every one of you, you've added invaluable perspective. And I know it's getting to be dinner time on your end of the planet. It's actually past dinner time. So I appreciate your being here. Let me just pull up this. Here we go. So this is a story in the third poll, which is this collaborative journalism project across the Himalayas.
Well, yeah.
So there's a lot of good reporting on here. It doesn't always sort of seep out into the New York Times and the BBC, although I think I've seen other coverage as well. And this is a big part of the net zero, pledges of India and the like, is boosting their renewable build out. But if it's not sustainable in terms of the regional risk, then that becomes a big problem too. There's one last element here I want to bring in, which is not just earthquake risk in the context of hydropower and these communities, but earthquake risk in the region. As you heard earlier, the Himalayas are young mountain range, and I've also written an enormous amount about earthquakes, and there have been some big studies that show that whole arc there is due. The Nepal quake in 2015 was not a worst case scenario, and there's much more threat coming. I did a post years ago in the New York Times on the hydropower earthquake question, but it's a region with a lot of hazard and a lot of people. So going forward, I hope we can maybe do another session of this, focusing on some of these key elements, the remediation part, warning systems part. It was horrible to think even it was 23 soldiers or military people are still missing. And if the military didn't get the word, then you can be sure that poor residents in those steep hillside towns did not get the word either to move to higher ground. The investment questions, as Keith and Ramesh have talked about, why is this dam construction going forward? As Austin Lord said, is there too much strategic ignorance in this arena? So thank you for being here today. I could talk longer. I'm sure you all can, but especially for my South Asian friends here, you've been very generous with your time into the evening, and maybe we can just repeat this with a little bit more look at some of the other elements. Keith, thanks for popping on.
Thanks for the invite.
On zero notice. And we have a lot you should come back on to talk about some of the other questions.
Oh, yeah. Anytime.
So thank you again. This is Andy Revkin. This is the Sustain What webcast. And I do this independently now. I was at Columbia University till recently, but this is something I cannot not do when there's big consequential issues that require conversation, sustained conversation towards solutions. So thanks everyone. As soon as we're done here, you can share the link that you're watching on with others. And I hope you will do that, especially if you're on Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn. Post this to relevant groups and to other institutions. And again, good night, good morning, good day, wherever you are.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Bye-bye.
Right. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.